In 1978, John Carpenter's Halloween defined the slasher genre, but how does it hold up to somebody watching it for the first time in 2024? Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Do you want to let the people know what we're going to be discussing today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. In honor of the upcoming Halloween, we are talking about Halloween from 1978, which kind of popularized the slasher genre, which follows this escaped mental patient who, after 15 years of being in a mental hospital for killing his sister, escapes and then starts returning to his family home, where he then proceeds to start killing the teenagers that live in the surrounding area. And we basically follow one of those teenagers as she tries to survive. So I've seen this movie a couple of times, and the two of you just saw it for the first time. So what were your overall impressions?
This was not great at all. And I'm going to caveat, so in the lens of like it coming out in 1979 or 78, whichever one it was, and in the lens of it being kind of like one of the first like slasher films in sort of like that particular genre, I can see the appeal and I can see why this is a classic to many people in terms of sort of iconic sort of character that they fell in love with, which they kind of like built a franchise from. But in terms of like how it's aged and viewing it from 2024, it's just not great. Like, it's not a great story. It's just like super simple story. It's not that great. It's not really that interesting. You don't really have that many interesting characters in this. So when people are dying, you don't really care because you're not really invested in the characters at all in this. Michael Myers himself, there's a lot of question marks and there's a lot of things that just aren't answered in terms of like what he's about in this particular sort of film. They even like try to have like the interesting perspective of having like his psychiatrist that was kind of like following him about and kind of talking up how evil he is, and like, there's just like kind of like nothing there. He's just like just this straight up like villain basically. But then they don't do anything interesting with it. Like, it kind of all culminates into him kind of just sitting in this like empty house and like sitting in bushes and stuff like that. So he doesn't really do anything that interesting once he actually gets to the town where all the killings are happening. I will say, as a person that doesn't like horror movie, I did feel like tense, and that's mainly because I don't like horror movies. So like I did feel tense anytime he was kind of going around and like stalking his victims, and when he eventually was like killing victims, I did feel a little bit tense. Don't know how it like sits with people who are more attuned with it, but yeah, it just wasn't great. And I feel like in terms of like all the movies that we've seen from like the 70s and the 80s so far, things like Aliens, Terminator, and stuff like that, I feel like this probably has like one of the weakest, like there really isn't too much to the story at all. I feel like that's probably what lets it down the most, is that it's just a bunch of teenagers, a bunch of babysitters, a bunch of horny babysitters, because everyone seems to be like trying to get with each other in this, apart from Jamie Lee Curtis's character. And yeah, there's just like nothing really interesting there at all being told.
Let me start off by saying I don't mind the message of the film. I think the message is pretty much evil can just be evil. It doesn't really need to be an explanation sometimes. It's just, I think they didn't execute it as well. So like, if that's going to be a message, which I honestly don't mind, because similar with The Strangers, right? Like, I loved the first Strangers, the one that came out in 2006. So sometimes evil can just be evil, right? And in The Strangers, I think that's perfectly executed, and that's a great example. It's like in the 2006 version, like evil was just evil, but like what they did with it in terms of like just the story and how they executed like just certain jump scares, and it felt like homework watching it. But at the same time, I enjoyed watching the birth of the franchise. So how the franchise came to be, because I'm pretty much a fan of all the Halloween movies after the 2000 period. Whereas the ones before that, I don't think I'm going to be a fan of. And I think I remember, I didn't watch this one. This is the first time I've seen this Halloween, but I think I saw another Halloween, because I don't know which Halloween it was, but with the main character, I was kind of confused as in like what his motive was. And I think that's later revealed in a Halloween that I saw either in the 80s or 90s. I'm not too sure, 'cause I haven't seen this one. But I think I saw a Halloween where there was a big revelation. Now, like, if the revelation is what I think it is, and if it is from the movie, then that means it makes sense why he's doing it in this film. But for someone who hasn't seen those movies, hasn't seen that movie that I'm referring to with the revelation, then it will seem like, what's the point of this? Because it's just like a madman that jumps out of that escaped from the mental asylum, and now he's just killing people for no reason. And there's no fun in that if you don't make the storyline or if you don't make the movie fun. So for me, like I said, sometimes it just feel like homework because like especially with like I remember the third kill, I think just leading up to his third kill, it took so long to get to that point, and I was like, yo, like it's dragging now at this point. Yeah, so I'd say I had a 50-50 experience with this movie.
It's interesting you say about like his motivation in the movie because it does seem like there's like some type of like symbolism in there or like some type of like reason to what he's doing in terms of like when he's like he puts his sister's headstone on the girl that he killed in there and the way like he's like placed some of the victims around the house as well. Obviously there's like kind of like links between his first kill of his sister and the later people that he kills because like his sister was probably babysitting, she had like boy and stuff like that. There's like some similarities there as well. And just the way he was like kind of like dressed up in his like Halloween costume that he was wearing it wasn't like 100% one-of-one because I think the one before was like a clown mask or something like that.
It was a different mask, but in both cases he's wearing a mask, yeah.
Yeah, so there's like something there. But it's like you said, it's just not expanded on in this movie in terms of sort of what any of it really means.
To go off what he was saying, I realized something which I never realized before, which is why I kind of like I felt 50-50 about the movie, and what I'm about to say is a positive. I think I never really understood why he used to do what he used to do, like for example, like playing dead and like hiding and just like that was very exaggerated, right? And also the mask that was very like exaggerated throughout the movie. But like watching this movie, I was like. I realized I was like, wait, the tactics that he does before killing someone kind of mimics that of a child in terms of like hide and seek, playing dead, the mask. It felt very, like I said, it felt very childlike. So I was like, that kind of links in to his character and it links into his motivation as well. He's kind of like I think in his mind, he's kind of like not a vegetable, but he's kind of like a child mixed with a psycho killer, if that makes sense. So it's like he didn't grow up from his first kill. Like he's still a man in a child killer's body. The way he was acting just mimicked that of a child, if that makes sense, but in a murderous way.
I think there's a couple of different aspects to this movie that makes it work for those who like it, right? And I think it's interesting to kind of go into the different ones, but let's start with the motivation. So he does not have a motivation, right? He like as a child, he just picks up a knife and kills his sister, right? And then 15 years later, he just escapes at the first opportunity, goes back to his childhood home, but then he starts latching on to random people, right? Laurie does not have anything to do with his childhood home other than she happens to be there when he's there, right? And then he latches onto her and then pursues her and eventually starts killing her, right? So there is not any reason to what he's doing, right? He's not defending his home. He's not living out some childhood fantasy, right? And I think that is, part of the terror that sometimes people just do evil things. And that's not terribly interesting, but then the question is, so my thing is, it's great when a villain has an interesting motivation, but if they don't, there has to be something else there, like they make something interesting happen, for instance. And I think what fills that gap in this movie is this whole idea of it happening in suburbia to just random people and nobody even notices. So I think an audience is not supposed to be, especially watching this in 1978, is not supposed to be scared by the kills. They're scared by the fact that this could happen to you in your home and this could happen to your children, and nobody would care if it did.
Yeah.
Right? Like at one point, Laurie tries to get help from neighbors, and they just don't help. Earlier on, when the child she's babysitting sees Michael Myers standing like in the bushes, she just dismisses it as nonsense. Right? She doesn't even look outside, or when she does, he's already gone, and she doesn't pay any attention to the idea, right? Like there's nothing crazy about this. Like there's somebody, who's stalking the house, and he's up to no good, right? Like it doesn't have to be like a serial killer. This could be somebody scoping out the house for a burglary or something, right? So there's nothing crazy about somebody's watching the house, right? But this whole idea of you are surrounded by people who are your neighbors, but who you don't even know and who don't care if something's going to happen to you. And so anything could happen to you behind closed doors. I think that's the idea. And for that, it doesn't matter who Michael Myers is or what his motivation is. He just needs to make it happen.
I actually think a really good way that they kind of like emphasize that towards the end of the movie was when the psychiatrist shoots him, and then it like kind of pans outside where his body was at first, and it kind of like disappears, and then they pan to like a few different like shots within the house. So I think they pan to like a bedroom, the living room, and a few like different spots to kind of like indicate that he could still be out there, he could still be hiding, he could still be like in your home, kind of like still like lurking and stuff like that. And it's still,
he could be anywhere.
Yeah, essentially just like emphasizing that like sense of danger and sort of kind of what you were saying there. So yeah. I feel like the film did a good job in sort of highlighting that.
And I think in 78, showing this happening to like middle class people in suburbia who are just going about their daily lives, right? I think that had novelty still. And obviously the genre has moved on since then. So I think this movie is kind of a victim of its own success in that it's one of those things that's been copied for 50 years. And as a result, it feels lame to us. It's not obvious whether or not that makes it a bad movie or not, because if we don't enjoy it watching it today because what it's done is so routine now and so common now, then it's not a good watching experience, right?
Yeah. I think as well what kind of holds the movie back, but like has made it not age as well, is that I can imagine during that period of time, like the whole like idea of like, having like babysitters watching over your kids and this and the other was like super relatable to sort of, a lot of parents and a lot of people of age that would be like kind of like watching that. And it's more
and they're probably in the cinemas and they probably have children that are being watched by babysitters right now.
And it's kind of like showing essentially like what all these babysitters are kind of getting up to while they're watching your children. They're kind of like doing all this like kind of like debauchery stuff in your homes whilst you're like kind of like out and sort of unassuming of it. So I feel like in that aspect it has like a huge relatability aspect factor to it in that time period. But where like kind of like times have moved on and it's like kind of like 2024, and not to say like babysitters and childminders isn't as popular, but I feel like it was kind of like more of a thing sort of back then. So for someone like me watching it, none of it really like meant anything to me in terms of like the babysitters and like that at all. Like none of it meant anything to me. But to the audience at that time, I can imagine, it was just like a lot more true to life.
We all live in apartments, right? And do we really know what goes on in the apartments of our neighbors?
Not really. But in terms of like the story being like emphasized on sort of kind of like these few characters, and obviously these are the people that were following in that. That's just kind of where it didn't lose me, but there wasn't that sort of aspect of like being able to relate to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was getting at with that comment is, I don't think you have to be like an American middle class person living in suburbia, right, in order to kind of relate to the idea. I think we all recognize that as kind of standing in for kind of normalcy and mundanity, and it's supposed to be a safe neighborhood where nothing ever happens and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Which I think that's a reason why horror and crime stories keep going back to that kind of setting over and over again, right? Because I think it still has that effect. It just doesn't have that novelty anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one thing I definitely enjoyed about this movie, which obviously they done throughout, was pretty much like close encounters and like Michael's ability for visual deceptions. Mm-hmm. But I think something like known about his character is that he does abnormal things. So do you think that this is like a flaw, or could you just say is pretty much an exaggerated, imaginative decision made by the directors, and we should just see it like that? This is a film, it's fiction, it's cool. Because, for example, he gets shot a lot, he gets stabbed a lot, and he still survives. And you're thinking, okay, but this is like, do you think it would be more effective if he was more of a realistic character, or is Michael Myers, the way Michael Myers is presented now, okay?
So that's actually something I also wanted to get to, which is Michael Myers is kind of two things at the same time, right? He's just a guy who picked up a knife and started killing for no reason. And he's also the boogeyman. He's also this unstoppable, borderline, unkillable evil that keeps getting up from wounds and can be anywhere and so on. And I don't know that works. I think the movie should have picked one of those two and then just stuck with it. And I think that would have been a more interesting villain and led to a better story. Right, where either like this is just somebody who cracks for no apparent reason and they're a danger to themselves and others, and that's all there is to it, right? There's no bargaining, there's no trying to rehabilitate him. It's just he's just a danger. Or you say he's this faceless evil that is incomprehensible and that is unstoppable and that will never keep coming. Because those are two are not like in the movie. I don't think there's a reason for why he keeps getting up after he gets stabbed and shot and so on, and why he disappears.
I think that kind of links to the whole point I made about him being childlike, because those are things that you do as a child. You play dead, you hide.
Okay, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's why, because I never understood this. I was like, why does he do it? Like even in near the last scene where obviously the main character thinks that she kills him, which was the way that she just stood next to the door and not even checked behind her to see if he was still alive was so stupid. But anyways, but yeah, like when he was playing that, I was so confused. Like, why does he always do that? Why doesn't he just, you know what I'm saying? Like, why does he have to do all of this wahala and all of this nonsense before he reveals that he's alive again? And that said to me, like I said, it mimics something of a child that would do. So
yeah,
there has to be like, I think there's, you know what? I think there's like something deeper that we're missing about his character, which is soon like, which builds up to something in the other movies, which I'm talking about. And like I said,
yeah.
I think I've only seen the movies from 2000 and up, but I remember seeing another Halloween, like I said, where there was a big revelation. So I think that all kind of links. That links to pretty much the revelation.
There is a remake that focuses on, essentially turns the first 3 minutes where we see things from Michael's view and where he kills his sister. That's basically the bulk of the movie, and it basically tries to explore how he got this way, and it's generally not been very well received on that basis because it's trying to explain something that is supposed to be unexplainable. And then in the sixth movie, the continuity for Halloween movies is they've done like reboots and partial reboots, and it's all very complicated. In terms of what counts and what doesn't, and what the story is. At one point, they bring something like a supernatural element, like an explicitly supernatural element into it, and that's also not been very well received because it just does not really line up with the earlier movies. In the earlier movies, he's just a guy who puts on a mask and starts killing people, but which does not preclude those thematic elements that you said, that he's a child at heart and that he does things as if he's a child playing. But the story still needs to make sense in addition to that, right?
Don't think we're going to watch the other Halloweens, Daniel. So I kind of feel like I want to just say why he's doing what he's doing because of the revelation. Like, I want to reveal the revelation, but if you don't think it's a good idea, I won't.
Yeah, so in the remake, it's essentially that he was abused as a child, and that made him evil.
That's not a revelation.
That's which one are you talking about?
Where about Laurie's character and Michael.
Oh, yeah, and then later, okay, yeah, go for it.
So basically, Laurie's his mom. So
sister,
which is wild. Oh, it's his sister.
Yeah. Like she's not old enough to be the mom.
I would say Laurie can't do
No, but that's okay. So this whole time I was confused because when I was watching, I was like, wait, she's in school? Isn't that Michael's mom? But because
she's revealed to be the sister or half sister or something. Like not obviously not the one that dies, but like it's said that they're related. But that's a retcon. That's not what happens in the first movie.
Okay, so I'm a bit I got confused because I briefly remembered something. Like, I don't remember the film which one it was, but there's a hospital scene, and then that's when she finds out that she's related to Michael. So I thought it was the mom, but it's actually the sister. Cool, my bad.
The idea is essentially that he wants to finish the job. He went after his family, and he started when he was 8 years old, and now he has to finish the job, and that means killing Laurie, and that's a retcon from the first movie where she's just a random person he latches onto.
I think that's to be honest. I like in terms of like making her like his sister, like I feel like that makes the story a little bit worse in context of like the first movie because. One, it's not set up at all. Like it's not set up. It's not like explained or anything like that. And then two, it doesn't then explain why he's kind of going after everyone else, and then leaves Laurie till last, and then like ends up in a situation where she's able to get away or whatever. It just, I don't know.
It's just like collateral damage, and plus it gives. But to be fair, it kind of gives him more of a motivation.
They weren't even in the same house. They weren't even in the same house that Laurie was. If they were in the same house and they were just kind of in his way, I would understand. But he's kind of gone out of his way to target these other people and then target Laurie as well.
But aren't those other people like they know Laurie? So isn't he just killing people, anyone that's around her or anyone that she knows or anyone that's affiliated with her?
But then that takes away from his like character motivation because his motivation isn't to kill the person and anyone that's related to that person. His motivation should be to kill his family members, his sisters or whatever, as it should be. So it wouldn't quite make sense why everyone else would be collateral damage.
Yeah, but his motivation is kind of like blurry, like it's kind of wacky, and I think that's how he's presented. So I don't think like he has a motivation, but it's not like a motivation which is clear, if that makes sense.
The reason he
Right.
latches on to Laurie in the beginning is because she's the daughter of the real estate agent who's selling the old Myers house. And so she drops off the keys because they have a viewing later that day. And he is in the house and he sees her, and that's how he latches onto her, and then he starts following her. And then he kind of becomes aware of her friends. So it's kind of he latches onto people and then starts killing them, and he latches onto the next person, hits the next person. That's kind of what he does in this movie. Mm-hmm. And Laurie is just a random person who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's kind of like getting stabbed on the train or being victim of just some random crime on the street. You were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's no motive for it and can still change your life. I think that's the kind of evil this is supposed to be. And that is then inserted into the supposedly safe and quiet and calm setting that the audience associates with safety and boringness and so on. So that I think that is the point. And I think that's fine for one movie. But if you are on the fifth movie in a franchise and all you can do is come up with new ways for your villain to kill people with a knife or with his hands, then you start expanding on the motivation. And they tried twice, once with childhood trauma, and then they did it 3 times already, and then second time with Laurie being family, and then the third time with the supernatural element, where some kind of avatar of rage or something like that. And none of them really worked or made the character more interesting, I thought. I think he is kind of boring as a character. He is kind of a one-trick pony because all he really does is stalk people and watch people and then kill them in fairly basic ways. But I think that's only a problem if you're making more than one movie. I think if you're making one movie, then that's fine, because you are basically like, it's just about the sensation of being stalked. So I don't really normally go into like cinematography much, mostly because I don't know enough. But one thing that was really obvious in this movie is that a lot of the shots are either somebody being watched or somebody watching, right? Like it's not every shot. There are some normal shots, especially when Laurie's with the children, but a lot of them are from first person point of view, either in terms of looking around because you have the sensation that somebody's watching you, or because somebody like in the bushes looking in, right? And I think that really reinforces this whole idea of being stalked and being watched and being hunted. That's reinforced over and over. And so it's just about the sensation of somebody stalking you, or you have somebody's like threatening you in some way and you don't know why, and it doesn't matter why. It's what matters is the danger.
So this is pretty much like a positive for them. I think they did kind of like do a good job of making him the physical, like presenting him as the physical embodiment of evil. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, even like there was a scene with, I don't know what they referred him to as, but he was like a doctor, right?
That's Dr. Loomis.
Yes,
he's a psychiatrist who treated Michael.
Yeah, there was a scene where he was talking to his colleague, and like he kept on referring him as a thing or it, and then she was like, "It, can we start calling him he?" So you could tell that pretty much their goal was just present him as evil rather than human. And I think that's it's kind of like a mystery, which they kind of like are consistent with throughout the franchise, because it's like you always ask yourself while you're watching Halloween movies, is this guy human? You know what I'm saying? Like I said, because he does things which humans couldn't do. Like even in this movie, when he killed the boyfriend with glasses, the way he just lifted him up and then he stabbed him, and then obviously he was just dangling in midair. I was thinking, okay, that's OD. It's very exaggerated, but at the same time, it raises the question like, this guy is just pure evil. I don't even think he's human. So I think they did a good job when it comes to that message that they were sharing.
Yeah, Loomis keeps talking to him as it, and just as not a person, right? And he said something like, I tried to cure him for 5 and I tried to lock him away for 10, and neither worked. In the script, he's famously referred to as the Shape. He's not even like a person in the script. And then that's also the point of the mask, right? That he's just an anonymous figure. And one little detail that I quite liked was in the final fight where he gets into the house and he tries to kill Laurie and she fights back. At one point, his mask comes off just for a split second. You can see his face for about half a second. And it's just a guy.
So yeah, they showed it, which I was going to say, how did you guys feel about it? But sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, like, it's very short, right? And they don't focus in on his face. So they don't give him an identity. But his mask comes off and underneath is just a person. Right? Like, there's nothing special about him. He's not disfigured. He's not a monster. There's nothing striking about him. He's just a guy. And that then, I think, reinforces this whole image that any person can become this kind of evil, right? It's not like you can't tell whether or not somebody's evil or not by what they look like, or like some other indicator. It's just like some people just are, right? And whether that's true and a good message and whatever is a different story. But like that's what this is reinforcing, right? That he's just the evil in your life that just descends on you and tries to hurt you. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. It just happens, and you didn't deserve it. You didn't do anything to provoke it. It just happens, right? So I think it does that really well, and it also I think does suspense really well. So you mentioned, like one of you mentioned earlier, like in the very beginning, about how slow it is and how it takes forever for anything to happen, and I actually disagree with that. So I have this thing about horror movies where I basically go do chores for the first half hour and then come back when stuff starts happening, because most horror movies, especially the not very good ones, have this first half hour when literally nothing happens. We're just showing characters doing mundane things, and we're kind of introducing their relationships and so on, so that we know who they are when they start dying. The bad ones don't do anything else in that time. And this one is different. Like Michael escapes in the first few minutes, and then he begins stalking people, and he starts closing in on people, and they start seeing him across the street or behind a hedge and so on. It keeps getting closer and closer, basically from minute 3. It starts building up this tension and this sense of dread, and this, like, I don't know if either of you have ever had this sensation that like you're out in public somewhere and you're just walking on the street and you get the feeling that somebody's following you or somebody's watching you. And you can't prove or disprove it in the moment, but it's kind of just a feeling. And it might be nothing, right? It might just be a strange vibe you get from somebody who's walking behind you or something. But like this whole idea of somebody's watching, like that's something I think that people can relate to.
No, and I understand, and I like agree that was what they was doing. But the point I made was the build up towards the third kill, because everything before that was good. So like I do agree, like a lot was happening where he broke out of prison and just. So a lot was happening in the beginning, but it was just the build up to the first kill. For me, it just felt a bit long, and I think it was that's the part I kind of felt like homework to me. It's not that I wanted to see more kills. No. It just I think there was a contributions of many things. Because for example, like sometimes with the dialogue scenes, right, it felt like I was watching old TV. I think a mixture of that and then that long build up is not really a good mix for me as a viewer. So that's why I felt like a build up towards that was a bit long, but I could see, obviously I get what they were doing. It was definitely like kind of like seeing just that's like a point I was gonna make as well. It was like obviously the theme of stalking, how it's presented, is like you're actually seeing stalking from a psychopath's perspective, which was good. But it just, like I said, just to that whole build up to the third kill, just for me was a bit long.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, so I had the same reaction the first time I saw it. So we're halfway in. How come nobody's died yet, right? And I actually think that is kind of a mistaken assumption about slasher movies, or maybe if you started watching them in the 2000s or later, it's kind of how they've maybe become, or maybe the first ones you see are kind of like that. But the second and third time I watched this one, every time I watch it, I start enjoying it a little bit more, because first of all, now I know what's going to happen, right? Like, I'm not waiting for it to get good. I can kind of start to appreciate what the movie is doing, even though there's no killing yet, right? But I do actually think, like, if you put this movie side by side with other movies like this, the bad ones actually don't do anything at all, right? They literally just have people talking about their relationships or being annoying to each other or something. But there's nothing really happening. And I think in this one, there's always something happening. And I think that is why it works. Like, if it happened to not work for you, that's obviously a different story. But I think objectively, the movie is doing something in that first half hour, first 40 minutes or so. Whether it's interesting or not is a different story. But like, there is actually stuff happening. We learn things about Michael. We learn things about those characters. We start, like, the stalking itself begins somewhere in the first 10 minutes, and it gradually escalates step by step. I think a lot happens even before the first kill happens, because like the kill itself is kind of the conclusion of it. It's not the actual thing itself, I think.
Do you know what I really liked as well about the stalking was how actually physical it felt, and like what I mean by that is that it felt real. It didn't feel in like some movies where they're kind of like showing a stalking and the person just kind of like disappears just like into thin air, and you don't really like. There isn't really any type of like rhyme or reason as to like why they disappeared. It's just like the movie needed them to disappear in that situation. But like with Michael, like firstly when he was just like kind of like stood there just staring at her, especially when he was like when she was in school and he just like stood on the side, it just felt real, and he like stayed there for a good amount of time to like actually like capture that, like, you know, this is like real, this like person is stalking you. There's no imagination to it. And even like the one in the hedge where they're sort of kind of like walking down the street and he's like stood there and then he goes behind the bush, like it just felt like it could be like it felt real in the sense that like when he disappeared, it was like I thought he went into the house, and then when like the police officer kind of like appeared with the psychiatrist and he was kind of going into the house, I actually thought that he was going to be the first killer. I thought like Michael would have been like hiding out in the house and needed like escape or somehow, and then would have had to have like killed the police officer. So I don't know whether like what I'm saying kind of like makes sense or like whatever, but like it just felt like his physical presence in terms of like his stalking just felt a little bit more there than sort of, you know, where they do this thing where like a bus passes by and like the person just kind of like disappears behind the bus and you don't know what's happening basically.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like the movie's playing tricks on you, right?
No.
Like it's just like he's just like when he disappears behind the hedge and he's gone, there's places he could be.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't look like he teleported. And I think that together with the fact that it's almost filmed like it's not quite like a documentary, but it's filmed in a very matter-of-fact style, right? Like we're not seeing like dramatic close-ups or something like that where his presence is maximized. He's just a guy standing over there across the street watching, right? And that by itself is creepy enough. And I think the fact that it's shot in such a natural way, where you can imagine if you look across the street, you can imagine just somebody standing there and watching, right? I think those two, there are a couple of different ways that kind of reinforce this whole idea that he's a real person, right? And I think that just it makes it scarier.
Question. So is Michael the main character and everyone else the supporting character?
I would say the main character is Laurie, right? Because it's very much her story.
Well, then if that's the case, I think what was missing for me in this movie was that emotional connection with the character, as in like what her like, because I think it's mainly because I didn't know what her significance was, as in like, because you know with other characters, like other movies, there's like they have like a story, right? So you can either resonate with that story or you don't, but they generally have a story which is intentionally done so the character, like so the audience can, you know, connect with the character and just be more emotionally driven by when they make a decision or when something happens to them. But with Laurie, because I was a bit confused, I said to myself, okay, the reason why I feel like Laurie, there isn't really much significance to Laurie, and she doesn't, because she didn't really have a story. I was like, okay, who the hell is she? So to me, that told me, okay, maybe because obviously there's so many Halloweens, she's so far she's a mystery, because obviously that mystery is going to end up being revealed. But at the time, if I was in the audience at the time this was released, and what I'm trying to say is, like she didn't have a story. So that's why I was a bit confused. I'm like, okay, I didn't really feel nothing for her when she was getting chased or when other characters were getting chased, because I didn't know what their link was. So to me, I was like, okay, I think Mike was the main character and these are like supporting actors. That's why I think the movie was missing. It was just that emotional connection with the characters, because I didn't know their significance. I didn't know their story.
I mean, she is just a regular person, right? Who just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then these things start happening to her, and the story is about her trying to survive. Right? Like ultimately that's what it is. And I don't know, I liked her fine. I think she's more likable than most other horror protagonists. Mostly because any made in the 2000s and later are just aggressively obnoxious almost every time. And here she's just a normal person. Yeah, I think you can say she's a bit boring maybe, but that's the point, that she's just a normal person. Like she could be your neighbor, she could be your classmate, she could be the person sitting next to you on the bus, right?
Yeah, my point was that she wasn't bad at all. Like I didn't have nothing wrong with her character. It's just she felt like a supporting actor in this movie, even though she's the main character, because I just didn't like. If something bad happened to her, I wouldn't have felt anything. That's the point. It was like because there wasn't anything to like you just revealed pretty much what her storyline was, right? So she's pretty much just an innocent civilian getting caught at the wrong time, like she's pretty much just an innocent civilian trying to survive, pretty much, right? So I'm like, okay, cool, that makes sense. So if I saw it from that perspective, maybe I would like my outlook of the film would have been different, because like, okay, that makes sense. That could be me. Like I just pretty much got caught at the wrong time, by a freaking criminal. Do you know what I'm saying? So I can see it from that perspective now. But before I was just like, why must we care about Laurie? Like,
correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't strike me that she's one of the like iconic characters in sort of this franchise, and she's not like kind of like talked about the way like other sort of kind of like iconic characters from that period of time are talked about, like, you know, your Sarah Connors or your Sigourney Weaver, like Aliens and stuff like that. It kind of very much feels like the superstar that kind of came out of this was Michael Myers, because even though I've not seen any of the Halloween movies at all, I've like heard that name, it's been like said and whatever. And obviously for like you as well, Jonathan, where you hadn't watched the Terminator movies, but you knew of Sarah Connors, and I feel like that's kind of part of the problem, because like obviously she's in like some of the sequels from what's sort of kind of what's mentioned, but like you said, there isn't anything really like that great about her. And like Daniel said as well, like there is like, it's not a knock on her, like she's not a dislikable character in this, but it very much feels like she's just there isn't anything special about her, and that kind of like then ties into the story, because it's a very simple story, and it's a very sort of like very basic story in what it's doing, but there's just like nothing really memorable outside of like Michael Myers. There isn't really anything memorable or anything key to really take away from the movie, for me anyways, and she's like part of that, where it's like you could replace her in the next movie and I probably wouldn't care.
But I think that's generally the case for main characters in movies like this. They're kind of random people who just happen to be the target of this killer, and then they try to survive, and then they barely survive in the end. Like, I don't know that very many of them have very compelling stories by themselves or these amazing personalities or something like that. I think my expectation going into this is kind of like she's supposed to be a normal person who is a bit more observant and a bit more resourceful than most. Right, kind of everybody else kind of sleepwalks their way through life, and she keeps noticing stuff. Right, she keeps noticing that she's being watched. She keeps looking for exits and weapons and stuff like that. Right, and she defends herself in a plausible way. But that just follows from she's intelligent and observant, and it's kind of that's kind of her special skill. Right, she doesn't do anything else really that is unique in that sense. And I don't know that that's a problem with the story. It's like these movies are supposed to be just, what if this happened to you, right? And for that, the person has to be kind of average and kind of boring, so you can project yourself into that situation.
And I think that's where my problem was. I didn't see it like that, and I think the reason why I didn't see it like that is because I've seen the other movies, so I haven't seen this one. So maybe if I knew that was the message of pretty much the franchise, which of course now has been exaggerated, because now it's pretty much the guy is pretty much like a supernatural being in the following movies. But if I knew that message in this movie, then I think I would have approached the movie differently, and I would have seen the movie differently, and I think I would have probably seen it in a better light. Because just like I said, before the movie, she was just a question mark to me. I'm like, okay, why must I care about this character? There isn't like a why for me to care about her. Because whereas for other horror movies, even though it can be rubbish, but there's always a why given as to why this character is important. But now, like you pretty much revealed the why for us. The why is you need to look. She's pretty much a reflection of you, as in if you were in that situation. That's actually good. I'll agree. That's actually like a good selling point of the movie. And like I said, I think I'm gonna watch it again now. I'm gonna watch it again because now I'm starting to watch movies twice and I can see things. Even when I watched Speaking of Evil twice, it was just enjoyable the second time because I understood what was going on. So I think if I now watch this movie a second time, I think I might enjoy it more because I'm like, okay, I'm watching me and seeing how I would react, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, but like when the first time I watched it, I was also bored and confused why this was supposed to be so great, and that's because I kept waiting for the action. Right, I was, and I think I had been conditioned by especially newer slasher movies. I think the 2000s themselves, like in the 2000s, were kind of the time where that kind of became the thing where it was just half an hour of setup and then nonstop running away from the monster and people getting killed. And this is not really that, right? Like the actual kills are relatively short. It's all this kind of build up of suspense. And if you're not there for that, then you're not going to get much out of this movie, I don't think. But if you are up for the suspense in a mundane, everyday environment, then I think this movie is really good at what that does. You just have to be on board with what it's trying to do. Any other thoughts on Halloween? Does it deserve to be a classic?
From my understanding is that a lot of what was done in this movie kind of like set up some of the key tropes that are then like sort of utilized in later movies. So in terms of like its place in history, I think it's kind of like well sort of deserved to be sort of held up as a classic, and sort of kind of like want to sort of kind of like go back and sort of look at and see where the genre sort of originally started from. So in that sense, yeah, it's not a bad movie at all. Like I know I've had like my little gripes about the story and stuff like that, but I wasn't bored watching it at any point as well. So I think again part of it is as well is that it was limited by sort of its time, the technology, and this, that, and the other, and what it could and couldn't do as well. So in that sense, I think deserves its place in history, deserves sort of its like being classed as a sort of classic movie, and it birthed one of sort of the iconic characters in the slasher franchise, alongside your Jason and your Freddy's. So yeah, I agree.
For me, yeah, I'd say it does. Not because it birthed the whole franchise, which I enjoy, but for its time, I could imagine what it was like. Because I keep referring to whenever I refer to old movies and like cultural impact it has, it's The Exorcist. Obviously, I remember that what you told me about it. Like I've never forgot that, because I can imagine what it's like the whole when the audience first, when you told me where the audience first saw like a moving train on the screen and how like cultural impact. I always think of like stuff like that when I'm watching old movies and like the cultural impact it has, because I can imagine what it was like back in the day. You're actually seeing, you're watching a movie where it can be very like it's just realistic. It could actually happen. So I can imagine what it was like back in the day for a film like this to be dropped. And yeah, it for its time was I'll definitely say it was a very, very good movie, and it deserves to be amongst the greatest, because many other films pretty much follow from the techniques it's using in this movie. So yeah.
And I think there's also a difference between a good movie and a movie you enjoy watching. Right? Like you can recognize that a movie does something important, or has been influential, or is doing a particular thing really effectively, and you don't care, right? That's a perfectly reasonable response to have to a movie. I just think this movie, if you put it next to other movies like it that have kind of this reputation for being these iconic classics, I think this one holds up among the best. Last year I went through an exercise where I watched a whole bunch of old slasher movies, mostly because I hadn't seen them, or I had maybe seen one in the franchise or something once on TV or something. And a lot of them surprisingly hold up really poorly, because a lot of the time they were kind of cash grabs, and they were just made to cash in on a fad, and they didn't really have much in the way of ideas or whatever. And about half the Halloween movies are in that category. But I think this one actually has, like, even if the whole idea of kind of everyday mundane terror isn't scary anymore, I think it's still really, once you buy into its mood, I think it still grips you. Yeah, that's kind of my bottom line with this movie.
Question: where the hell does Michael receive first aid? Because this guy, like, I don't know how he keeps, like, each movie he comes back like a new man. Like, I'm like, so where the hell, like, but to be fair, no one knows his identity, so maybe just walks into a hospital.
Well, I've got another one. Why can't he drive?
Yeah.
That was a point that was made in the movie.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So I think there are some story problems with this, but I think it's mostly about the mood, right? It's mostly about the atmosphere and the sensation of being stalked, or, there's somebody after you, that kind of thing. And I think that's what underpins the entire movie. And the fact that it's a bit shoddy in a few other places, maybe, I think is okay, or at least it doesn't ruin it for me. Like the story is the same if he just walked from the mental institution, right? Like the fact that he has a car is not really important.
Yeah.
Right. And he doesn't really get injured until the very end, right, where he survives being stabbed and being shot multiple times in the span of 5 minutes. Before that, I don't think he gets injured, or not as seriously. I think this stuff doesn't ruin it. It's more like, did it have to be that? Could you have just patched up just this in one or two places?
All right. Well, guys, hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Have you?
Yes. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Is Halloween one of your sort of favorite all-time classics in the genre? Did you like it? Does it hold up for you in 2024? And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Catch us next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.